Ambassador Tai, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being here. So I want to start first with something that you've said recently. You said a copy and paste of AGOA would be a lost opportunity. Talk to us about where there is consensus right now on what should stay and what needs to maybe be rethought of in the next form of AGOA.
Well, let me take a step back and just reflect. AGOA was established in 2000, so we're 23 years into AGOA, and obviously it's been reauthorized a number of times. In these 23 years, the program has fundamentally retained its shape, which is a set of tariff preferences granted by the United States to the countries of sub-Saharan Africa who retain their eligibility, and it's meant to foster trade and investment here in Africa by providing these preferences into the U.S. market. A lot of things have happened in both the United States economy and for the economies in sub-Saharan Africa over the course of these 23 years. And certainly since the last time and most recent time AGOA was reauthorized in 2015, even, many things have happened. One development I wanted to reflect is the coming into being of the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is really consequential, the aspirations of the countries on the continent to integrate economically. I think that, as part of looking at the AGOA program, we should try to figure out whether there's more and what more we could do with the AGOA program to complement the program and the aspirations that are within the AFCFTA. Second, we have asked an independent U.S. agency run by economists to take a look at the performance of AGOA as a program and assess how effective has it been. And one of the findings that has come out of that study is that utilization rates by our partners on the continent, the rates are uneven across the continent, and then overall we're seeing a low rate of utilization. So I think that there should be an opportunity for us right now to examine how we can improve utilization rates and make them better across the board. And then I think that the third element I would really like to look at is for the economies on the continent that have experienced very robust growth over the course of the last years and decades, as they get closer to the graduation point for AGOA, because AGOA is meant as a trade and development program, how can we start articulating a forward vision for U.S. Economic collaboration and partnership with the countries on the continent who are looking at the possibility of graduation in the near to medium term. Right now, the way AGOA is designed, once you graduate out of AGOA, you kind of start over at square one in terms of your trade relationship with the United States. We would like to take the opportunity, we, the administration, certainly would like to take the opportunity to think about how to articulate a forward version for continuing to build on a partnership with the countries on the continent.
Where do you start then? Because that is a lot, right? When you're looking at sort of the list of things that need to be prioritized before September 2025, what do you think is the most pressing at this point?
It sounds like a lot, but it's really three main elements. And there's work that is already underway and conversations that we're having. In fact, I think that one of my primary goals for participating in this year's AGOA Forum, which is being hosted by the government of South Africa, is to meet with my trade minister counterparts, to meet with the extensive stakeholder groups and communities that have been invited from civil society, from organized labor, and also from the private sector, and to get a conversation going, to have all of us compare notes and put our ideas together on the table to see how we can accomplish improvements and modernization for AGOA in these three main areas.
You said there's been a low utilization rate. I mean, what would you point to as being the reason behind that? Because as you mentioned, it's been uneven. There's been some countries like South Africa that have benefited, other smaller countries that have not so much.
Exactly.
What do you point to?
So, I think that that's one of the central questions, and one of the questions that I want to pose to my trade minister colleagues, which is let's compare our experiences. For those partners that have been able to extensively use AGOA, what is it that has been most effective in ensuring that kind of use? And for those who haven't, has it been a matter of barriers or challenges or capacity or just knowledge? Do we just need to promote better information around the program and its availability? What I would really like to do also is to challenge our partners here to undertake an exercise at home and to try to put together an AGOA implementation plan. It is part of the existing AGOA. It's an encouragement for partners here to devise an implementation plan. What we have seen is the most effective utilization comes from those countries who have put together an implementation plan and have put it together through working with their own agencies inside of their own governments, as opposed to contracting out this work. So I think that that is a part of the conversation I'd like to have as well, which is this is what we perceive from our side. Please, you tell us what your experiences have been, and let's try to inform this process with respect to renewal.
Are you anticipating a lot of criticism going, because there's going to be a number of bilaterals that you'll be sitting in? What are you expecting to hear from your counterparts across the continent, from across the continent?
Well, I'm hoping to hear optimism and enthusiasm because we really are here to engage. And I think that there have been 9 very, very senior level administration officials who have made visits to the continent just this year alone. And coming off of the African Leaders Summit that President Biden hosted in December of 2022, we were given the instruction to engage and to continue to build partnerships. From my perspective, those are the economic partnerships between the United States and the countries on the continent. So I think that we have a lot of momentum that we are generating, and I'm hoping that the conversations that I have really reflect that momentum and reflect the opportunity that is before us.
What gets in the way of that?
What gets in the way of that? I think it's a complicated world. It is an increasingly more complicated world. There are changes that are going on all around us in the global economy. There's this still discombobulation coming out of the pandemic in terms of the pandemic recovery. I think that there are structures around us that are changing. There are a lot of institutions also that are starting to show their age. And so I think it's a complex landscape that we are each navigating for ourselves, but is really important for us to figure out how to navigate together. And again, I think if you look at the demographics for the African continent, the youth of the population here, the growth of the population, we have a very strong interest in continuing to articulate our vision for how the United States can show up as a strong partner. That requires us to also be at the table to listen and to hear our partners in terms of what their needs are and what their vision is.
And ultimately, I think what's important to remember is that a lot of this hinges on Congress, right? And on Congress passing the act again. There was another trade pact, the GSP, the Generalized System of Preferences, that Congress let lapse, right? And this was another trade pact that was supposed to help developing nations. Are you concerned that that could potentially happen again with AGOA, especially if we look to 2024? It's an election year in the U.S.
So election years happen every 4 years, so that is very predictable. Having worked for the Congress in a prior part of my career, I do know that it's probably a fool's errand to try to predict much about the Congress. Although I will say this, I think that the support for this program in particular remains strong. I know that there is interest
within Congress.
Within Congress, yes, that's right, on a bipartisan basis, and the administration is committed to working with Congress to support them in a timely and successful renewal process.
I'm glad you said timely, because I saw President Biden came out with that statement that said timely. I think he also said expedient. What is the timeline that the administration is looking for in terms of renewal?
Sure. From my perspective, it is a seamless renewal that we are looking for. We want to make sure that as of September 30th, 2025, that there will be another AGOA that will pick up from this one. Aside from that, I think I want to leave open the space to continue conversations with our Congress in figuring out what the timing looks like exactly.
So, South Africa, though, had asked for an early renewal, right? Is it possible that we could see a renewal prior to 2025?
I think that many things are possible.
But I mean, give us a sense of really, I mean, what the next step looks like after this summit.
Certainly. What you would normally expect to see in the regular order of Congress is that when Congress moves to work on legislation, there will be bills that are introduced.
Yeah.
You would expect to see hearings in the committees of jurisdiction.
Right.
You would expect to see a markup of bills, and then floor votes in either in both chambers, and then if there are differences between the two bills that emerge, a reconciliation process. So that's what you would expect to see. And in terms of working with our Congress, it is a statutory program, as you noted, and so we are a partner with our Congress. Those are conversations and discussions that we will have to have with them in terms of how they see their own calendar.
How do they see this act? I mean, because it needs to benefit both sides, right? And I'm assuming that Congress wants to make sure that whatever renewal is also benefiting on that side. What have you heard based on the discussions that you've had at this point?
So those are questions best directed at our members of Congress and the leaders of our two houses and the committees, the Ways and Means Committee in the House and the Senate Finance Committee. So I think that you'll get the best answers from them. I think that there is interest and support for the program, and I expect to be continuing our engagement with Congress when I go home.
And Ambassador, I also wanted to ask you about eligibility, because we mentioned it leading into the summit. We heard Uganda, Niger, Gabon, and CAR were temporarily removed from the program. But then I also saw, you know, it's sort of depending on the policies of these different countries, right? But we're also living in a world that is more multipolar, with a lot of these countries having differing ideological and geopolitical views. I mean, is it possible that more countries could be added, you know, based on their views on the Ukraine situation, what's happening in Israel? Is that a part of any of these negotiations?
So I'll just remind you that AGOA is a statutory program, and there are defined and specific eligibility criteria. So for the 4 countries who have been informed that the intention is to remove them from the AGOA program starting January 1st, there are very, very specific reasons. For at least 3 of them, for 3 of them actually, it's rule of law and political pluralism. For 2 of them, the reasons also include gross violations of internationally recognized human rights. And again, these come from the statute itself. It is a complex world, but the AGOA statute is what it is, and that's how eligibility is defined and assessed. In terms of what happens for determinations of eligibility, there is a review every year where all AGOA participating countries are assessed for their eligibility. And there are out-of-cycle reviews that are possible at other points in the year for considering the readmission of countries that have had their eligibility suspended. So it sounds complex, but all of it is spelled out in the statute, and our role as the administration is to administer that statute.
Well, there was some concern earlier this year when we're in South Africa over the Lady R situation, and that potentially affecting South Africa's position. People in Congress were calling for South Africa to be removed. That's why I'm asking. I mean, could the statutory, could it change? Could it evolve given the world that we're now living in?
Certainly everything could evolve, but in terms of the schedule for eligibility review, that happens once a year, and it's announced in the fall every year. And countries who have been informed now could potentially be readmitted back into AGOA before September of 2025? Before September even before fall of 2024. I think that, you know, we're very, very clear about the reasons for the revocation of eligibility, and then we also try to be very clear about the progress that needs to be seen based on the reasons for the justifications for removal that would create the pathway for readmission.
And let's just finish on, you mentioned a number of leaders from the U.S. have made visits to the African continent, you as well. We haven't yet seen President Biden, but it seems like he is trying to continually engage in what's happening here. Is this all a part of the administration's continued push into re-engaging on the continent, considering the years of really being a bit removed compared to other countries?
I think that what you've heard from President Biden and the entire administration is a clear prioritization of U.S. partnership with Africa, economic partnership and across the board. I will just speak for our administration, which is if you see that prioritization, that is very much intentional and is very much a reflection of the value that we place on our relationships with the countries here.
Does any of it have to do with China being the biggest trading partner, though, on this continent?
I mean, I think that we recognize the trade statistics and that China is a big player. China's footprint with respect to trade around the world is significant. But I do want to emphasize that on the part of our administration, there are so many reasons for the United States to be investing in and enhancing our relationship with Africa for Africa. And I think that that's probably one of the most important messages that I want to convey, which is this relationship is inherently valuable between the United States and the countries on the continent, and between the peoples of the United States and those on the continent. We have such strong bonds with respect to our history, our culture, and I think that we want to be able to reflect that going further in the kind of partnership that the United States can offer.
And ensuring that it works for Africans, as you mentioned.
Absolutely.